Hello, I'm Casey, and I've been building websites for a long time. Over that time, I've seen a lot of change in our industry. I've seen changes in the hardware and the languages that we work with. And I've also seen changes in how we build websites. And it's that last change that I want to talk about today. So let's go back and tell a story. I want to start with the story of how we used to build websites. Back in the day, content was king. This was a phrase that was coined by Bill Gates in 1996, and it's something I learned very early in college. Content is the reason for why we build websites. We want to share information with others. And here we have a piece of content. It's one of Aesop's fables titled The Oak and the Reed. I want to take this content and turn it into a website. Well, to do that, first step is going to be to give it some structure. And I'll do that with HTML. Without it, we just kind of have words on a page. They don't have any structure or meaning. HTML creates the actual web page. We have paragraphs, we have headings, we have a main element, and we're giving our content hierarchy and meaning. Next, let's apply a design and style it with CSS. Here we're giving our content visual meaning and personality. And finally, if we're feeling kind of fancy, we can add some interactivity to our content with JavaScript. Now, with all those things combined, we have a web page. Each of those steps had built upon the last, and we had a very clear separation of concerns for how each of the languages affected our content. We also applied each language in a specific order. It's a little bit like the order of operations in math. PEMDAS is a mnemonic device that helps us remember the correct order in which we solve math equations. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Now, we have to solve math equations in a certain order in order to get the correct answer. And the same thing kind of applies to our websites. If we build them out of order, we might end up with something that's inaccessible, with poor performance, or a code base that's difficult to maintain. So we kind of have our own developer order of operations. And I propose that we call it chonky house cats jumping for content, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. All right, so cool. I just explained to a room of web developers how to build a website in one of the most basic ways possible. There is a point to this, I promise. Before we get to that point, let's talk about today, right? We have a new developer order of operations for modern development, and its story can look a little different. First, we typically start with frameworks, right? We're not usually building a static single web page. Our websites tend to be more complex, and in order to handle that complexity, we have frameworks. We have a ton of frameworks to choose from. And this is a good thing, right? Every project is going to have a unique set of requirements. So it's kind of cool that we have all these different options to choose from. We also have a new king, and it is components. Components are a bit like building with Legos, right? We have different sizes and shapes of blocks. They all have different use cases. And those blocks can also have variants, right? Like having different colors. We stack those blocks together and build something really complex and cool. Well, components are our building blocks of the web. Here is our original web page, but this time it's built within the 11D framework. Our different page elements for the story have been broken out into component partials. Our content is then passed to those components, and everything's compiled together to create a web page. Those frameworks that we started with have had a huge impact in pushing us to build this way, right? They make it easier for us to manufacture our building blocks and then put them together. Now, even though each framework is going to have its own unique structure and rules, they all pretty much follow the same concept of breaking things into reusable components. And finally, we have JavaScript everywhere. Now, JavaScript isn't new. It's been around since 1995. But back in the day, it was really just a client-side language that was used to make websites interactive. And it still does that. But it's also doing a lot more heavy lifting. With the help of Node.js, we can use JavaScript for our entire build processes, right? Most of the frameworks from the previous slide are JavaScript based. Node.js's tagline is even run JavaScript everywhere. And we took that tagline, kind of ran with it. But once again, none of this is new to you. You work with this tech every day. The thing that I want to ask, though, is working this way a good thing? There are some great pros to modern development practices, right? The components that we build are reusable. The frameworks that we work with are scalable and versatile, and we have a large ecosystem of those tools available to us. All of this stuff together has enabled us to be faster and more efficient developers. With those pros also come a few cons. We might find ourselves dealing with extra complexity and bloat, right? There was something kind of elegant and the simplicity of just the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from that first story. The 11T project, on the other hand, required an entire directory of nested files and scripts that were dedicated to generating a single page. Now, in practice, you're going to probably generate more than a single page, but when you're used to building with this framework approach by default, you might find yourself abstracting everything in this way, regardless of whether or not it's necessary. It's also worth noting that there were 356 node dependencies required to make that 11T project run. That is a lot of third-party JavaScript that's needed to build a web page. Some of those frameworks also compile client-side, which can make progressive enhancement difficult. When you want to fall back to that raw HTML, but you really need the JavaScript in order to build it, you can leave some people without access to your content. There's also some security risks that can come along with using JavaScript, right? We have cross-site scripting and injection attacks are possible with JavaScript. And the more we use it, the more we open ourselves up to those risks. Also, the more we're using third-party scripts, the less control we have over our JavaScript. So we're exposing ourselves even more to security risks. And then lastly, the nice thing about that static web page is anybody that has development experience can jump into it and make edits and changes with a minimal onboarding, right? They just have to know those basic languages. When you introduce a framework, you now have to train developers within that specific framework. On top of that, every framework can be configured differently to suit the needs of the project, requiring the need for more onboarding time. So web development has come a long way. There are definitely the good things. We have some good things and we have some bad things. I think we can minimize the cons a little bit by pulling some wisdom from the old way of doing things. We can start with separating responsibilities. Chunky house cats jumping still applies to modern development. It doesn't matter that those components are wrapped in a JavaScript framework, right? We can still start with and focus on our content and then layer in HTML, CSS, and presentational JavaScript in that order. We just might be doing it on a component by component basis instead of building an entire page. We should also think critically about what is essential. It's easier to do that, I think, when you're starting with like HTML, layering in CSS as needed, and then layering in JavaScript as needed. But when we're working in these really big JavaScript-based ecosystems, it is very easy to add in plugins and modules. That's cool, and they can be helpful and increase efficiency, but as we saw with the node modules, they can increase load. Just be mindful about what you're adding. Is it something that you can build yourself? I like to keep the KISS rule in mind, right? Keep it stupid simple. Next, of course, don't forget progressive enhancement. try to keep your browser, or excuse me, try to keep your framework out of the browser for this one. Deliver static content to the clients, and keep your framework on the server if you can, or if not, find workarounds. Make sure that no matter what, if the JavaScript fails or cannot be ran, that folks are still able to use it. Also make sure your JavaScript isn't slowing down the website for folks that are on like have a slower connection. Now, this is just good practice all around, but if you're going to add complexity via a framework or anything really, document it along the way. We've all been there. It's very frustrating when you just don't know how something works and the documentation does not exist. Please help future developers understand your code base so they can jump right in and start contributing. Sometimes you might even find that you are that future developer. I don't know how many times I've gone back to a code base a few years later and I really don't remember what I did. And I wish I would have written better documentation for myself. And then finally, content and components are not competing kings. They're actually besties. They're both crucial in building modern websites and applications, and we really need them to be working together. So those are the stories of how we used to build and currently build websites. And we do have a moral to these stories, which we can find if we go back to the original content that we started with, the story of the oak and the reed. An oak that had been uprooted by a storm was carried down a river to the banks where many reeds were growing. The oak was astonished to see things so slight and frail had withstood the storm when so great and strong a tree as he himself had been uprooted. It's really not that amazing, said the reed. You were destroyed by fighting against the storm, while we survived by yielding. We as developers have to do the same. We should be like the reeds and strive to stay rooted in place, in the things that have been important to building a better web. But we also need to embrace change because it happens often and quickly in this industry. So this is the end of my talk, but it isn't the end of our story of how we build the web. It's more like the end of a chapter because you never know when something's going to come along and change things.